But um, to, to, okay, now we're on.
Mm-hmm.
It may be worthwhile to talk about the issue of the distractions that
Sure.
you were talking about, because some things appear to be wholesome and that they wind up being distractions.
Mm.
An example of that is the example from the Buddha is that we have to catch the Dhamma correctly. It has to be grasped correctly. Because if you don't grasp the Dhamma correctly and you go into the Dhamma, it will cause you suffering.
Mm.
As you can see, Dhamma and meditation and Buddhism in general has caused an enormous amount of brand new suffering in the West. People giving themselves tension headaches and neck pain and all kinds of things through wrong practice. Others get really, really weird ideas like rebirths and reincarnations and all of that. And the thing of it is that most of the people who come to Buddhism come uh, out of either nothing at all or a culture where they were actually in an actual Christian culture. But even those who come that they would claim are not in the Christian culture, still, it's a Christian culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whether you believe in this stuff or not. But here's the
Mm-hmm.
point that I'm making: the Christian culture, both Christians and otherwise, it has elements of magic in it. So people are naturally inclined and subject to magic. Even atheists
Mm-hmm.
are
Yeah.
subject and inclined to magic. Therefore, when they come into Buddhism, either out of Christianity or out of atheism, and then take on claims, ridiculous claims, claims that go against nature and go against modern physics. And yet, people will take up these new beliefs because they're associated with Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
And within Buddhism, over the centuries, from the time of the Buddha, there have been very, very many ridiculous, let us say, billboards plastered to the backside of the Buddha. And they read these billboards and then they start believing things that don't exist. Typical example is the Hindu law of karma, or the Hindu law, or the Hindu belief that karma, when you believe in it correctly, the law of karma requires then that you believe in reincarnation,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Here is why that's true. The law of karma states that any action is either a good action or a bad action, and all good actions always lead to good results, and bad actions always lead to bad results, and they will give those results back to the door no matter what,
Ultimately.
ultimately. Right.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
so that means that if someone dies, they've got to be reincarnated, take a new body just so that the karma machine can slap them around. Now, that's
Mm.
a Hindu belief. That's not the teaching of the Buddha, nor is it the teaching of rebirth.
Yeah.
And yet, most Westerners who believe and take on Buddhism and believe in rebirth, they don't even know what it means. And so they believe what in rebirth and say it's all over the suttas without even bothering to figure out that, oh no, that this is a Brahmin belief that the Buddha used, because otherwise he would argue with them.
Mm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
you'll wind up a whole lot of people in the West now coming to Buddhism to get some value out of it, but they picked it up from the wrong side. And now they're causing themselves suffering and beliefs in magic and doing all kinds of things. And then when they're challenged, either with the physical reality or they're challenged by some old happy fart, they get angry
Mm-hmm.
because they
Mm-hmm.
picked up a belief that they picked up in adulthood that was no need to do. The Buddha actually uses an analogy for this. The analogy is, and the name of the sutta is the simile of the snake. Do you know what we're talking about here? If you grab a snake by the wrong end, if you grab a big snake by its middle, it's going to turn around and bite you. If you grab a snake even 1 inch below its throat, it will find a way of turning itself around and swinging around so it can take a bite out of your hand. You've got to grab it at just the right point, so that you've got it literally right by the throat.
Right.
Just immediately behind the head. Okay? That's exactly how we have to grab the Dhamma. If we grab it any other place, it's going to bite us. It's going to cause suffering. All right. Now, why does that lead back to what you were talking about? Well, that's the whole point of it here is that everything, when you grab the Dhamma correctly, it's going to show you specifically how to eliminate the distractions rather than picking up new ones. And here what we're actually talking about, and you're very correct to do this, to use the word distraction when you're actually using it as the definition of dukkha.
Okay.
Yeah. I would like to be in this state, but this thing over here is pulling me away from this state. And I'm being distracted. And look at the word distracted means to get off of the path. So that's a very interesting word, distraction. And so that's what, when you use that word, I said, we've got something here because we can talk about this thing about distraction. Because that's exactly where people are with Buddhism is they're distracted by it rather than following it.
Yeah. Right.
Now, the most important thing about the whole belief in rebirth is the following. And that is that everything that the teacher teaches, the Buddha teaches, be here now. His name was Tathagata. He is not about either the immediate past or years ago, nor is he interested in the immediate future too much. There's a little bit of immediate future. I mean, sometimes you got to go get a ticket before you get on the boat.
Yeah, yeah.
But other than that, kind of planning, where there is actually direct requirements. Other than that, there's no reason to plan anything, especially planning on fixing things that are broken in the past. So if this is true, that past and future causes suffering, then what about the deep past? And what about the deep future? Do they not also cause suffering?
Deep suffering.
All right, here's an example. If someone decides, either rebirth or reincarnation, and by the way, I haven't even drawn a distinction between the two. And so I ask you in the question in advance to mull over while we're talking here, and that is, do you know the distinction between rebirth and reincarnation? What is the difference? Because all of the little Buddhist boys, they claim the Buddha taught rebirth, he taught rebirth, he taught rebirth. And yet all the Brahmins that came to talk to the Buddha and everything about that, including what's still believed in Hinduism in modern times, is reincarnation. And most Buddhists who come from the West don't know the difference between rebirth and reincarnation.
Okay.
Or that, in fact, the word rebirth has two different meanings. It's got a noble meaning, and it's got an ordinary meaning. And so now that we've gotten these kind of things going, so now we have rebirth in two forms as well as reincarnation. And most people can't even tell the difference between any of it.
What wouldn't could you draw a similarity between maybe a misunderstanding of a born again Christian when Jesus said he was born again? That there's a kind of a similar misunderstanding in what he's saying as to what Buddha might have been trying to get at?
Precisely so.
Okay.
When Jesus says you must be born again, that means you have to be born not from your family, your friends, and your society and all the rules of society, that you must be born again into a much higher class person. All right.
Yeah.
And so the born again is to take on the lineage, in that case, the lineage of Jesus, or the lineage that Jesus actually came from, which he, as far as we know, never got recorded. But believe me, Jesus didn't pop out of a womb as a no-fuck baby and with all of that magic.
Mm-hmm.
He went to some school and he was reborn in that school.
Mm.
It might have been the Essenes or the Essene. It might have been in Egypt with Therapeute. But we do know that wisdom, as deep as the Buddha's, was available in the Mediterranean by that time. But it got a little bit modified. So ye must be born again is precisely exactly the same point is in Buddhism, when one is reborn out of being an ordinary person into nobility, which is the fruit of Sotapan. The fruit of Sotapan is to live the noble life, and we change lineage. The change of lineage in Buddhism is exactly the word reborn that Jesus would use.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You must be born again. Here's an example. The Pharisees believed that the end times, the Acropolis, the rapture, the second coming of, or even the first for them coming, they were looking for a Messiah that's going to change everything. And so they went at one time, this is by the way in the 17th chapter of Luke, where they come and they listen to him talking to kids. In fact, this is also the chapter where it says, suffer the little kids to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of God. And such is the kingdom of God is when they started getting really weird about it. And so they started asking him questions. When is that going to happen? Where is it going to happen? Blah, 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 blah. So now you can hear that those questions means that they're very ordinary minded, past and future oriented. Mm-hmm. And Jesus answered, you're not going to know those kinds of things. But that, and in the Greek, the word is basilica theos. Now, the word basilica, we know what that word means.
Yeah.
In fact, only the very, very biggest of the really, really big cathedrals are called a basilica.
Right.
There's only a few of them. Okay, so what we're really talking about is a huge, huge palace. This vast, and at least one room is enormous with really high ceilings. And when you get that concept, and then you sit in meditation, sometimes you can have that experience of being in a vast place. Things really get open. So that's the basilica quality of it. And the feeling is the kingdom of God, then, this basilica theos is within you. Mm-hmm. And that within has always been an issue that the translators had trouble with. Does within mean among, like that the Holy Spirit is there in a group, a little Christian group? When you get 3 or 4 Christians together, that's when basilica theos happens. That it's actually among. Oh no, the actual Greek word is within, inside, here. You can imagine that Jesus is thumping his chest when he says that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the point, that the kingdom of God is at hand does not mean either it's in the immediate future or that it's in your hands in the sense of outside the body. But rather, the kingdom of God is at hand means here it is. This is it. And so in those ways, the teaching of the Buddha is precisely the teachings of the Buddha. And Bhikkhu Buddhadasa knew this. He could see it. But most Westerners, when they read the Bible, they read it from the context of Christianity. But Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, having a context of Buddhist, when he read that, he could see Buddha all over it. And yet, going back to that quality of now that Buddhism is coming to the West, it's being delivered in a Christian basket, not in a noble basket. And that's happened in many ways. One of the ways that it's happened is because of history. That in the East, it was due to wars like with the Brahmins wiping out all of the Buddhists. They say that they killed between 80 and 100 million. Well, it must have been 80 because the other 20 million went to Thailand. And Sri Lanka and Burma and Laos and Cambodia and China.
Yeah.
And Japan, because there was a major outburst and outgrowth of Buddhism during that time. In fact, that was also the era where Angkor Wat fell apart due to new Buddhist influence, noble influence. Ordinary Buddhism does not quite have the impact that noble Buddhism does. Noble Buddhism, when people join the noble path, it turns everything upside down in that person's life. To whereas with most Buddhists, becoming Buddhists, they just take on more rites, more rituals, more beliefs, and continue doing the same old thing that they've been doing for their whole life. And the reason that the Western Buddhism has gotten that way was because, unlike Asia, right from the very beginning, that even in the oldest references to Chinese, the Chinese came to India and stayed there long enough not only to really understand the Dhamma, but thought of it well enough that they decided to translate the stuff and take it back to China. Then Bodhidharma, by the 5th century in China, he brought the Noble Dhamma. So the Noble Dhamma has always been transmitted.
Mm-hmm.
But in America and in the West, that didn't happen. In the United States, it was first with Henry David Thoreau in the 30s, then Alcott, then Madame Blavatsky, and a lot of magical stuff in the 1880s. And that's also when the translation started. But they were started out of Oxford, and they were done for scholarly reasons, because this Pali language looks so similar to Latin and Greek that they got interested in the language. So almost all of the original translations out of the Pali were done by people who were not even Buddhist. And as you can see all the language that they used. Look at all the Christian language that wound up in Western Buddhism. Monk, nun, temple, meditation, prayer, chanting, robe, the entire language. They just took all of the language that they knew out of Christianity and what was happening in the Christian church, especially the word monastery. That one's a good one. Another one is that in Christian services, they go along with chalices and bowls and things, but the monks in Thailand do not carry a bowl. They carry a pot. Look at it. If you know the difference between a bowl and a pot, then you're going to see that the monks carry a pot. And then when you hear the Pali that they go on pindabat, the word bat is the same word as pot, walking with the pot. And then in English, because of the bowls on the tables for the Christians, they use the word bowl, and it's not a bowl.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a bowl is used in food because it's got an open area, and you want to have a large open space so it'll keep things the food can cool off.
Mm-hmm.
But a pot is different. It's got a curved shape with a smaller hole at the top because its intention is to keep things hot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ah, okay.
Also, a pot may be big and have handles on it.
Yeah. That's interesting.
It is, but you can see why bowing and scraping was one of the things. That was the very first thing I think that Christians ever learned about Buddhists was, oh, they bow and scrape in front of an idol. They're already seeing it within the lenses of it being a religion.
Right.
Rather than seeing all the bowing and scraping is actually just an act of gratitude. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, thank you.
Right. Yeah.
So this is what's happened with Western Buddhism, and in fact, the funny part about it is that the snake was delivered to the West in such a way that it was very difficult or impossible to grab the snake by the throat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for that reason, Western Buddhism struggles. Now, here's the thing that we can really look at this point is that throughout the sutras, I can show you 4 or 5 different references where it says that the teachings of the Buddha are good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. Well, if they're good in the beginning, that means the students are seeing value of it immediately. And because they see value in it, they want to continue doing it. But the Westerners, they don't get value out of it in the very beginning. What do they get? Struggle, because that's not what they know how to do. They were taught to struggle. And so they take on and practice meditation with a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And so right effort actually is the teaching of to come out of the struggle. You've got to have the right kind of effort, not too much, just the right amount. And it's got to be flavored correctly.
Mm-hmm.
The way that they look at it is that, oh, if I've got this food here and it doesn't taste good, let me just pile on more food. Maybe if I double the quantity of food or triple the quantity of food, it'll taste better.
Mm-hmm. Such a
but
hard
that doesn't happen.
for the Western mind to grasp. It's just a culture of there's the self-flagellation, with like exercise and everything. It's all a cycle of guilt and overreaction. Guilt
Mm-hmm.
and then overreaction to something you don't even like, and then back to guilt and when it's untenable to do it that way. And I think we just like default to that. I don't know why
Mm-hmm.
we're so guilty. Why we have so much guilt that's there by default. It's
You could go so far as to call it original sin.
mm-hmm.
What is original sin? The Christians have a part of it, the story correctly, in the sense that the original sin is the stuff that happened so long ago, but it keeps following along with each new generation as we come along. That sin is basically taught to our children. You have seen little children who, when they play by themselves or they play with their friends, and play is actually play. And yet, when adults do any playing, someone else will call it horseplay, hold their nose, and think that it's wrong for adults to play. That's part of the original sin is that we beat the playfulness out of our children. And those who don't get it completely beat out of us, when we act playful as adults, people get really uptight about it because you were supposed to be trained. You were supposed.
So true.
You're not supposed to play. You're supposed to be serious. You got to go to work. This life stuff is serious business. No, it's not. It's very playful. It depends upon your attitude. And so, in a way, that's what Buddha is teaching. Buddha teaches how to regain our playfulness.
Yeah.
How to be here now.
I just had a baby last week.
Oh my goodness! Now, have you gotten into the world records with that one? You're right up there with JC.
My mother was here taking care of our other child while we were in the hospital, and I came back and we got into it about raising children. She's very uptight about I was raised to be seen and not heard, that kind of upbringing, and we don't no physical punishment or and try not to put any of our hang-ups on him as little as we can. It's of course we're gonna
and here she comes full
tilt wanting to whip him, and why don't you whip him, he's hard to handle, and he's
well, stop handling him. He's playful.
And he's less vindictive and mean-spirited than any kid. He's just full of energy, and he's constantly playing, and she can't keep up with it. She thinks he needs to be, you see him playing with a toy and he's not playing with it the way she wants to, and she says, well, don't turn it over that way, put it over the kid's gonna take that toy and push it to the limits. He's gonna test every single limit that toy has. It doesn't matter to him.
He is actually needed and necessary for him to dismantle the toy, even if he never gets it back together again.
Right. Yeah, it's more.
He's got to pull it apart. How is he going to understand his toys if you can't pull them apart? And then old grumpy uncle comes by. Why did you take that little boat apart? That was an expensive boat I gave you. That was supposed to be kept on the shelf as beauty item for the years and years you'd remember me by. And here you pull the damn thing apart. You know exactly where I'm getting at. Now, here's a question that I have for you. How old's the boy?
He'll be 4 in October.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. This is deja vu beyond imagination. Okay. That exact same thing happened to me. Exactly like that. Yes. While Mom was doing her thing over there with the doctors and the butchers and all of that, those who cut things, my grandmother came and tried to run the place. And boy, was that a memorable thing. That set us apart for our whole lives. My grandmother and I never were able to connect after that. And so I warn you that your 3-year-old, he's going to remember this episode with Granny. And that he may never develop a relationship with her. And she may go around saying for her whole life as she gets older and older that particular grandson doesn't love me.
Yeah.
Without ever connecting that. Well, you set that up, lady. You did that yourself.
Yeah. I joke about it now, but it was deadly serious in the moment. It wasn't, it wasn't funny to her. It
was not funny to him either. He was not laughing when that was going on. He'll remember that. 3-year-olds are impressionable.
Right. Like I said,
he may or may not remember any of the scenes and activities that he was associated with while he and his grandmother were there alone together. He may not ever remember those as memories. but he'll remember them as feelings, and those things will affect him.
Mm-hmm.
So you might want to try to do a bit of psychotherapy with him in the sense of talking through this and ask him what was it like with Granny, and what does he think about Granny, and that kind of stuff to sort of even that out, because nobody did that with me, and that was a knife wound that I carried her whole life.
Mm. Mm.
And if you do it right, you can heal that wound so that they can, in fact, be friends.
Yeah. Yeah. It's 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 the same. I try to talk to my mom about our relationship. It's the same. I've got a couple of those knife wounds,
No,
Same old.
this is
Yeah.
between you and the boy, not between you. Can't change her. She is no longer impressionable like a 3-year-old is.
I can see that. I can see that. Yeah.
So you need to give him the skills he needs to handle her.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, she will be a distraction for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Going back to that word distraction, getting off the path, getting waylaid, or actually getting bitten by the very snake that we're trying to capture and manage. It's interesting that the sutta actually talks about using a stick with a fork. Like a long branch that then breaks out, and you cut those two off very close so that it's like a Y with a very, very long handle. They knew about that.
Water stick. Is that what they used to call those?
Exactly right. Yeah. Except that they take that thing and they'll jam it down on the back of the snake, so as to keep the snake. Okay, and then they do it fairly close to the neck, so that then the hand can go down and actually grasp the snake by the throat. If it's a cobra, the cobra hood is above the top of the hood. That hood is all throughout the throat, and it's an expansion of the throat. But you do not want to catch that cobra at the bottom of that hood, because he's going to bite you. You got to catch him right at the back of the neck, right at the very top. Right just about where the mouth opens.
Yeah.
As you can tell, I've been snaking too. Yes, I was in the deep south. Been there, done that one too. I find it so amusing. Almost every analogy the Buddha has, I said, yeah, I've done that one too.
My uncle he would just shoot them with a shotgun. So that was my upbringing. We weren't so clever as to have sticks.
Well, the guys that are doing the stuff with the sticks, they're intending to make a belt.
Yeah.
You shoot a snake with a shotgun, his pellet is no good.
You think it came more from a hatred of snakes?
Exactly. It wasn't even greed, it was hatred. But both of them are pretty ignorant.
That's true.
But meanwhile, that's the problem with the Dhamma, is that people have got to catch it correctly, or it's going to bite them. And the way that you can see how that bites them is the fact that they're not getting good results right from the very beginning. And now you're at the stage when we're out here in the middle, and you're talking about the distractions that are keeping it from being good in the middle for you. Because you keep getting off the path.
I know it's good, and I want to be there, but then those distractions, it's like a sticky rat trap or something. You just, I don't know how to describe it, but you fall into it, and then you realize when you can get sharp and present, it sucks, but you get lazy or.
No, wait a minute. You got it. You just hit on it. All right. Once you step into it, you see that it sucks. That's actually the definition of, again, suffering. You don't like it because this is suffering. It's almost like not watch imagine the cowboy that gets off his horse and he's walking across the pasture there, and he's not watching where he's going, and he steps right into a cow pie, a fresh one, a brand new one. But he's not watching where he's going. And he considers that suffering. In fact, he dislikes that stuff so much that he wants to immediately start getting it off his boot.
Right.
And you can see him moving all of his foot around trying to get that stuff off of it without actually taking the boot off or dealing with it directly. Maybe he'll take a stick or something to try to get the stuff off. All right. And the thing of it is that he knew stepping in a cow pie was dukkha before he stepped into the cow pie. But now he's got a completely new knowledge of it. This is suffering. Not that is suffering, but this is suffering. Okay, so now that you have that knowledge, that if you actually step in it, you step into that trap, what you're talking about, or I'm talking about a cow pie. Or in Vietnamese, Vietnam, which is the capital of Laos. The last time I was there, they had a dog problem. You could tell because you had to watch every step you took. Nobody's cleaning up the streets.
Okay. Wild dogs?
Yeah. Well, just it's just overrun, and they weren't organized to have dog catchers, and I don't know why they didn't take them to the temple. Maybe the dogs would just leave the temple because they weren't getting fed. But this is the big city, and this was, anyway, we got the point. The point is, you got to watch where you're stepping. Now, if you take that analogy and recognize that's all we have to do throughout our whole life, is to see dukkha and avoid stepping in it. Oh, there's one little further ingredient. We have to remember to be on watch for it. That's where the sati comes in. That's the one major teaching that the Buddhists have that no other system has. The Christians talk about praying all night, but they don't think about this issue of you gotta watch what you're doing. You gotta note, you gotta see, and in order to do that, you have to remember to note and remember to see.
Yeah.
Which would be basically then step 9 of Anapanasati, to know the mind in the sense of is it either hindered or not hindered? Because in a way now, if we get actually out of metaphors and dog piles and cow pies and traps and that kind of stuff, and get right to it, what we're actually talking about is the hindrances of the mind that keep us from being in a pleasant state. And so it's basically thoughts about the past, thoughts about the future, restlessness, and basically the restlessness of the mind is a bit different from the restlessness that is called a fetter, but they're really, really deeply closely related in this following way. When the deep restlessness is there, then it manifests itself in bodily chemistry, doing things to the body to get it ready to move. Okay, it's part of that freeze, fight, flight syndrome that we have built in. And so the fight and the flight means that we're preparing for motion, getting the body ready for it. But thoughts and feelings and emotions and whatnot can come up while someone's sitting at their desk. And here's all of that stuff preparing for fight or flight, and there's no place to flee to, and there's nothing to fight. These are really old, primitive, down to the DNA or survival instincts that come up for us. And when they come up like that, then the mind will get restless in the sense that the restlessness is already through the body chemistry and whatnot, and we feel it in the form of anxiety. Anxiety, stress, these are the kind of feelings that we have, but they manifest themselves in trying to find the solution to the problem of this stress, this anxiety, which means now the restless mind is hunting for a solution to a problem that's ill-defined.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're trying to look for the problem. What's the problem? So that restlessness automatically carries us into the past, and it automatically carries us into the future. And that the right thing to do is to deal with the actual sensations and the feelings of anxiety directly. But so long as we're thinking about what to do about the anxiety, that's a hindrance to dealing with the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
The restless mind. Now, here's an example. Back in the old days, the peasant is living in his hovel. He's got his fire, and he's in the night. He's feeling tense, anxious, uptight. He knows something's wrong, and so he starts to think about it. And then he realizes, oh, I've got to go fix the fence. If I don't fix the fence, the goats will get out, or the dogs will get in. And so he goes and he fixes the fence in the night. A little bit of a struggle, a lot of work. But he comes back into the hovel. He sits down. He relaxes for a minute. And then the anxiety comes back. So even though he did a good job of fixing the fence, he didn't solve the issue that the intention of fixing the fence was supposed to solve. And that is, I'm supposed to feel better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, has that ever happened to you in any way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, with, everything, you think things are gonna everything I've ever bought in my life, any urge to, make a large purchase, or like if I bought a car, right? When I was several years ago, I thought I obsessed about this car, and I bought the car, and I thought, now my life's going to be better, and it just got worse. Never got, the car payment was too much. The car was just a car after about a week. And then I wanted
the thrill
something
is
else.
gone.
The thrill is gone.
Yeah. That's the state of humanity. Those two songs, one, the thrill is gone, and the other one is Rod Stewart, I can't get no satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
Some guys get to buy the car and they can't get no satisfaction. For you, the satisfaction came, but the thrill is gone. All right, so now we're getting at it. In this regard, the restless mind is a hindrance to dealing directly with anxiety. And the distracting restless thoughts, when we follow those or listen to them, they become the distraction.
Is restlessness synonymous with boredom, would you say?
Exactly. They are exactly the same thing. They're two different aspects of it. Mm-hmm. An example of that is if you're on a long car trip and the kid's in the back and they start to say, Mom, I'm bored. What does Mom do about the children being bored? She wants to give them something to do.
Mm-hmm.
She could also say yes to distract. Bingo. She could say something like, I'm sitting here bored too. I just love being bored. There's no place to go and nothing to do. I hope you like being bored soon. I really like it when there's nothing to do. You too soon will like it when you can find time when there's nothing to do. So sit down and shut up, kid. But it's a different approach. So yes, you're right. Boredom is restlessness. Why? Because boredom is actually being dissatisfied with the present and we want something new. That is restlessness itself.
Mm-hmm.
Being bored, and sometimes people get bored with their meditation. In fact, the joke is the story of refrigerator door. Here the guy is sitting in the meditation. He's sitting down and he's watching his in-breath and his out-breath, and then he realizes that he's standing in front of the refrigerator with the door open. He was so distracted he didn't even know he got distracted.
Yeah.
And when that happens, that's a huge wake-up call. To find yourself in front of the refrigerator door while you thought you were sitting to meditate. Now that's a big wake up.
Yeah.
Almost like sleepwalking. So we have to work with these distractions. And the way to do it is to remember to keep asking yourself, are these thoughts that I'm having right now worth having?
Mm-hmm.
Now you can do that in an ordinary mind, but there's a sweet spot or a right place to do it, and that is from the state of sukha, which would be step 6 of anapanasati, of sitting in that state of pleasantness. Just this is really nice, and I want to maintain this state. And I do not want to have the kind of thoughts that are going to start making me restless and anxious on the inside. And so I start watching the thoughts to make sure only wholesome thoughts are allowed in, because any unwholesome thoughts can become a distraction.
Yeah.
And so now we have to think about what's unwholesome. The things that are unwholesome are going to distract us, going to make us want things, going to make us hate things, going to make us want to make a plan to pick something. It's going to also have us in the state of remorse and regret about something that happened in the past. And in fact, that remorse and regret is exactly the motivation then for a plan. I don't like the way that it was, and so now I've got to go fix it. While I'm sitting here, and instead of thinking about what was that was broken and what needs to be fixed, I can be happy instead.
Mm-hmm.
So we start to understand that there is a whole group of thoughts that we would call distractions. The Buddha calls them hindrances, but they're exactly the same thing, and they are dukkha, or at least under the preview of dukkha, because it distracts us from sukha.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that restlessness is the neck, so to say, of the snake that you have to catch?
Right, you got to grab it by those hindrances, or it's going to turn around and bite you with hindrances. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, the snake itself are the hindrances, I suppose, is the right way to say it. That's interesting. I hadn't put those two things together. Yeah, so you really do have to grab the hindrances by the throat, and the way to do that is with joy.
Mm.
If we do it with trepidation, then we might miss. But if we do it with the joy and the skill of, aha, I've caught another snake. Out, then we just grab him. No trepidation. Now, here's the reason that I'm using the word trepidation is because trepidation with the snake is fear, But normally when students, beginning students in meditation, the meditation becomes bad for them when they don't like that the mind has wandered away from the breath. In fact, because they had already had the mind wandering away, they were already in hindrances, which means they weren't already in a state of joy and bliss anyway. So now they wake up and recognize with sati that the mind has wandered away. What are they going to do? They're going to stay in that same feeling level. They're going to continue. It's almost like even though they caught the hindrances, they may not even come out of them. They just saw the hindrances and jumped right back into them.
Mm-hmm.
That's the common way that people practice.
Mm-hmm.
They have to at least have enough effort, right effort, to abandon the hindrances once they recognize that we're thinking about something other than the things that are worthwhile thinking about.
That's what's changed my practice of this is what you do, focusing on the sati and remembering more often. The frequency of the sati is more and more and more, and then on top of that the effort that I feel more like that there's a vigilance that's developing, that's constant, that's there,
Yeah, right. Excellent. You call it vigilance. I call it the guard because I use it because they talk about it in the sense of guarding the breath, guarding the mind. But vigilance, yes, exactly. All right. Here's another word for it: the witness. That one who is looking. That's the one who is watching. Okay. And that watching quality is often then is what we refer to as mindfulness. Yes, you do need this mindfulness. You do need that watcher. It's a skill to be developed, and you will not develop it without sati.
Right.
Sati is that which gets mindfulness, or the other part would be the way we use the word in the sense of investigation. To keep investigating, keep watching, be on vigil. All of those words work together in the sense of painting a picture of the job that has to be done, which is one's right effort. Is to stay on guard. Because what we're going to guard is this happy, pleasant state of sukha that we have developed.
Is the ultimate goal that you don't
There is no ultimate goals. Every goal that's ultimate is ultimate within the next second.
Right. That you need the sati.
Where's your clock? Show me a clock that says ultimate on
it. Well, that you develop the guard, like you say, to a degree where the sati is not that you don't need to remember because you're there, you're always there, that, but or that you're constantly your sati is constantly there because you're constantly remembering.
I wouldn't use the word constant, but rather constantly reoccurring.
Okay.
Consistently reoccurring.
Okay, I see.
Like a drum. How do drum players play a drum? Do they lay the stick on the drum head and hope that the music is going to come, or do they keep having to beat on it?
No, yeah.
That's the word that we use in Pali called unremitting. Keep beating on it. Keep beating on it. Keep beating on it. Yeah, you forgot, but now you remember. Exactly so. That's a better way of doing it rather than demanding of yourself constant.
Okay.
Because if you demand of yourself constant, then you'll constantly see that you're not constantly doing it, and therefore you'll start to constantly feel bad as a failure.
Okay.
So this is how we start to deal with the distractions on the cushion. Now all we have to do is start applying that out in the world, to start to recognize that these things that are about to become a distraction don't have to be. I can just forget all about that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when that car salesman talks about that new car, next, well, you learn that lesson. You're not going to step on that cow pie.
Nope.
But there's other hawkers out there trying to get you to step on their cow pie.
Yeah.
So don't let those things be a distraction. Your job is to stay on the path, not get distracted from the path. And that path is also a path of joy, going from one step of joy to the next step of joy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna. I've made a resolution to start being mindful every time I get the impulse to pick up my phone. That whatever that impulse is, because it's constant and it's directly related to suffering and to distraction.
I know what you're doing. I know what you mean. I've got exactly the same thing. I constantly, like at least once a day, have to pick up the cell phone just to make sure it's the charge, or does it need a charge?
Once a day.
Once a day, right?
It's not the same problem.
I've got the same
a
problem.
little bit worse problem. Try 500 times a day.
Well, start watching those impulses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some days
with the question, does it need to be plugged in for a charge? If not, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I've got another call coming in,
okay.
So if you are satisfied, then that's all we need.
I'm satisfied with my service, Dhammarato.
All right, you keep that state of satisfaction and watch the mind to make sure that no thoughts come in that pull you out of that state of satisfaction.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
If you can be satisfied and just sit satisfied all the time, then who needs to be enlightened? Who needs any of that magical stuff? That's the wrong end of the snake anyway. That's the rattle. Don't grab the snake by the rattle.
Okay. Well, thank you.
We'll see you. Time. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.